Disclaimer: I do not own the rights of any of the videos, images, or sounds other than my own voice that will be portrayed in this video. Everything you will see is for documentary purposes only and is protected under the Fair Use Act of 1976. How often do we watch a movie which we are unaware derives from something else entirely? Some may be obvious, and most have global popularity, while others could be considered slightly more obscure. We know the Marvel Universe is based on comic books. We know Mortal Kombat is a video game, and we know that Harry Potter is a universally beloved novel series. Although comics and video games give you visual representations with the source material, there are thousands of examples of how turning a book into a film can lead to magnificent outcomes or crumbling hopes of what could have been. Through the late 1930s, we have what is considered the silent film era. Over this period, there were depictions created of Sherlock Holmes, Huckleberry Finn, David Copperfield, Frankenstein, Dracula, just to name a few popular ones. There were many other book-to-film adaptations made during this time, probably because it was the easiest story to tell. The source material is already there, and it's already proven successful. The first full audio film was released in 1927, and as we bid farewell to the silent film era, video media took on a force of its own. This would open up doors for not only the tremendous growth of films, but also the huge opportunities of adapting beloved novels into a media that not only gave you a visual representation, but now it would give you a full audio experience. Now you were able to see your favorite books acted out. You can give a voice to a character, hear the affliction in their dialogue, truly feel the love, fear, anxiety, or sadness.
Did I upset your plans? You've come to Nottingham once too often. When this is over, my friend, there'll be no need for me to come again.
One of the biggest hits that came out of the 1930s, which easily shows how big of a deal this concept would become, is 1939's Gone with the Wind. Based on a novel of the same name released in 1936, it is definitely one that is globally well known, quoted, mimicked, and parodied to this day, without being remade, probably because the original was 4 hours long, and perhaps that's hard to consider breaking down. Either way, no one has touched it. Book-to-film adaptations continue to reign throughout the years, giving us plenty to choose from, but they are not left without critique. When discussing this concept with many books being published, hitting best-selling records, and getting the phone call from Hollywood to get the mainstream treatment, it wouldn't take long before authors began scrutinizing what was being done to their stories. There are many popular examples that can be found throughout film history. J.D. Salinger, famous author of Catcher in the Rye, shunned Hollywood after they ruined his short story, Uncle Wiggily in Connecticut. It was first published in The New Yorker in 1948 and was adapted into a film titled My Foolish Heart. Salinger publicly demonstrated his disdain for what he considered to be a humiliating representation of his work. E.B. White hated the Disney adaptation of his book, Charlotte's Web. Quote, "The story is interrupted every few minutes with a jolly song. I don't care much for jolly songs, but that's what you get for getting embroiled in Hollywood." Cinema history is filled with a copious amount of these examples, and it just shows a completely different angle of what could happen when taking the risk of adapting these stories. Not only do you sometimes see what the writer's side of it is, but there's also considering the fan base of that novel itself. Fans who truly hate certain movies that are based on books they absolutely love. But with all of these stories out there with questionable adaptations, there is one example that I feel stands out above all else with just how much there is that went on behind the scenes. Helen Linden Gough was an Australian-born half-British author with works published from the 1930s to the late 1980s. The name might not be familiar to you, but by the age of 25, she would change her name that would be a little bit more fitting in history. She would take on her father's name of Travers, and then change her first name to Pamela because she said she thought it was prettier sounding. So Pamela Linden, or P.L. Travers, was born. Her first and most successful work of note, Mary Poppins, published in 1934. The series is compiled of 8 books in total, released up until 1988. She would have other works published in between, but none would garner as much love as the Mary Poppins series and the character itself. As you might be aware of already, this would lead to the 1964 adaptation starring Julie Andrews and Dick Van Dyke. The film has garnered millions of dollars earned from its movie sales, merchandise, basically anything Mary Poppins related. It is also a film that is top rated and wildly loved by critics and audiences, no matter the age. The film isn't short of being a timeless masterpiece. The year it came out, it was nominated for 13 Academy Awards, where it would go on to win 6 of them, including Best Actress and Best Musical Score. Julie Andrews would also win a Golden Globe for Best Actress. The film would win Best Original Score at the Grammys. It is a film that appeals to kids of every generation, but there is one person who hated it. That person was Travers. Why? The reason for that might surprise you. Walt Disney Pictures began its mighty journey in the 1930s of making a huge impact in cartoon animation. Iconic films like Bambi, Cinderella, Snow White, Dumbo, films all considered part of the golden and silver age of Disney that would play a tremendous role in all of our lives. Films we would come to revere for decades. Disney himself really wanted the rights to Mary Poppins ever since 1938. His daughters loved the book, and he promised them he would make a film. However, Travers initially refused. She did not believe a film made of her book would do her story or the character justice. For 20 long years, Disney pushed and pushed and pushed on Travers to get the rights. She held out until 1961, but she made sure she had written in the contract for these rights she would have final approval of the script and was to remain a consultant throughout production. This same year, Disney would hire the Sherman Brothers, who would work on composing the score for the film. They would go on to work on dozens of films for Disney till this day, but a catchy song would not save the scrutiny Travers would put on the pre-production process. She hated how the script was moving more towards a lighter representation of the Mary Poppins character. The book portrays certain harsh aspects of her personality they wanted to dumb down and make lighter. She hated the music. She hated the use of animation. She had a negative outlook on everything Disney Productions was doing to her story during the entire process. However, there was something in the contract that she overlooked, which caused most of her objections to be ignored. Disney himself had written in the contract that he, and only he, had final cut privileges over the film. Basically, this overrules any of Travers' objections, and the sole reason why the film was released with everything she hated. This would move Travers into a state of mind that she would not allow any other adaptations of the Mary Poppins character to be produced. Unfortunately, the story does not stop there. The film premiered at the Grandma's Chinese Theater in Los Angeles, August 27, 1964. Travers was not invited. She would obtain an invitation almost forcefully from another executive in the Disney offices. Once the film was over, it received a 5-minute-long standing ovation. It was said that Travers was seen crying in her seat, but it was later discovered they weren't tears of joy, but tears of heartache. During the after-party for the premiere, Travers would confront Disney, expressing loudly her issues with the final cut, to which Disney replied, "Pamela, the ship has sailed." Travers has been quoted in saying she felt the studio did a strange kind of violence to her work. Besides this film, there were only 2 Russian-language episodes of a show released in 1984, but they are noted as having nothing to do with actual Mary Poppins stories written by Travers, just based on the character in some capacity. Besides that, there's nothing else. For many years, Disney tried to get a sequel made with Travers' approval, but they never reached another agreement. Travers passed away in 1996, leaving the rights of her work to her estate. In 2015, an agreement was met with the Travers estate and Disney for an official sequel to be made for Mary Poppins, leading to the 2018 film Mary Poppins Returns. It is considered a single narrative not correlated to any one book in the series, but an original idea that followed up 25 years after the events of the first film. It starred Emily Blunt in the titular role of Mary Poppins, and Lin-Manuel Miranda as Bert, the same character played by Dick Van Dyke in the original.
As I live and breathe.
Van Dyke would also make a cameo appearance as the chairman of the bank.
As you...
This feud between Travers and Disney became such a big deal that an entire film was made depicting the behind-the-scenes story. That film was Saving Mr. Banks, released in 2013. Mr. Banks refers to the character of the father from the novel and film. It is most likely due to the success of this film, the sequel was even considered at that point in the Mary Poppins history. Travers would be portrayed by Emma Thompson, while Walt Disney was played by Tom Hanks. It was a critical and financial success, but is it historically accurate? Well, it's made by Disney, so you can imagine the liberties taken to assure the heavier issues were dramatized in a different manner. It portrayed more of a story of the trials and tribulations of making the film, and a more positive outlook on how Travers and Disney came to terms with the road the film was going down. A review for the film in the Chicago Tribune said, Disney was indulging in a little revisionist history, adding, the truth was always complicated. Despite authors hating or loving the film adaptations for their work, how many of the behind-the-scenes issues they face are given their own dramatized film to tell that part of the story? Any film created to show what it was like for an author in the background is mostly regarding the positive aspects of finding inspiration, not the negative backlash from the author to the production company, and certainly not that company being Disney, one of the biggest film production companies in the world today. The idea that Saving Mr. Banks is even a film is enough to make this whole story an abnormal look behind the scenes. As the audience, it is hard for us to look at a beloved movie and think anything negative about it. Most don't go into deep dives into a film's history when all they want is to enjoy the story for what it is. It would break our hearts to think a movie we held so high would actually have been through such an unfortunate trail to get to that level. But a trail that would lead it to greatness must also acknowledge the prints it left in the sand, the bridges it burned, the skeletons in the closet. The sad truths of what it took to make such a film cannot be ignored once it is known. Mary Poppins will always be an adored film, but the truth is, what we love came with a lot of complications. Even though this trail made by the unfortunate events of the film are not
practically perfect in every way,
it still led us to a movie that made history. Maybe that is the best thing we can take from this, and hope that the Mary Poppins legacy will still live on.